News, Chattanooga's news, talk, and sports leader.
Fox News Talk 1240.
So did you like Google? Well, too bad, because it's not there anymore. No, just kidding. Well, sort of anyway. Google is now part of a group, we'll say, called Alphabet. So the main trading stock now is called Alphabet. So if you want to trade for Google stocks on the NYSE, now it's under the title Alphabet. So Ars Technica has written several times about what a huge, sprawling company Google is, and that's very true. Google is huge. I mean, ginormous. And it owns quite a lot of property. It owns quite a lot of subsidiaries. It has quite a few investments. Google is an extremely large company. Well, Google has got lots of things going on all at the same time, lots of different projects. The now former CEO of Google, Larry Page, has apparently agreed, as part of a big shakeup he's announced today, that he is now the CEO of Alphabet, a brand new company of which Google is just one part. Page will be CEO of Alphabet, and fellow Google co-founder Sergey Brin will be helping him run Alphabet, I should say, in some capacity. Sundar Pichai is now the CEO of the subsidiary known as Google. So this is no mere rebranding, Page is writing. Alphabet Incorporated will replace Google Incorporated as the publicly traded entity, and all shares of Google will automatically convert into the same number of shares of Alphabet with all the same rights, and Google will become a wholly owned subsidiary of Alphabet. Our two classes of shares will continue to trade on NASDAQ as Google and Goog, that's G-O-O-G-L and G-O-O-G, and the Alphabet subsidiaries, including Google, will be using segment reporting to report their financial results separately as well. Page describes the Google part of Alphabet as a slimmed-down company that still encompasses most of the things that we like to think of as Google products, things like Google Now, Google Photos, Google Maps, all mentioned by name. Both Chrome and Android will continue under the Google banner as well. YouTube, which is already its own separate subsidiary under CEO Susan Wojcicki, will also remain under Google. So YouTube is going to be a integrated part of Google, just as we expected it would be. So YouTube is not changing. Really, on our end, we're probably not going to notice any changes immediately anyway. Our Google experience is probably going to remain basically exactly the same. But it's interesting still on the corporate level because Google is now different. It's not the same company that it's been for the last, 15, 16 years now. Other initiatives, which Page describes as fair afield of the main internet products, will be subsidiaries of Alphabet with strong CEO who runs each business. Page mentions the life sciences division, which is responsible for what smart contact lens concept, that smart contact lens concept, among other things. Calico, which aims to devise interventions that slow aging and counter age-related diseases, and the experimental X Lab, as subsidiaries are now under the Alphabet banner rather than Google's. So there's a separation. Now, of course, there's a legal reason for this as well. There's separation of liability, which is extremely useful. That's part of the reason you form a corporation, is separation of liability. In fact, LLC stands for Limited Liability Company or Corporation. So it's quite clear that this is, of course, for liability reasons as well. This separates the bigwigs, in a sense, from liability from the rest of its subsidiaries. So very smart move legally, very smart move business-wise, economically. It's just smart all around what's happened with Alphabet. So it's interesting to see anyway. Page says that he does not intend the Alphabet brand to replace Google or any of the other Alphabet subsidiaries on any products. You won't be using Alphabet Mail or Alphabet Chrome or anytime soon. In other words, the whole point is that Alphabet companies would have independence and develop their own brands, he writes. In the short term, we wouldn't expect using Google's various products to change. Pichai has been running big brands like Chrome and Android for several years, and he's been running the internet business since last October. He will remain in charge of these products, and he still won't be responsible for handling the out-of-left-field concept products that the company periodically announces. If anything, sprawling events like Google I/O developer conferences could become less sprawly, focusing solely on actual shipping Google products and less on works in progress, I should say, like the internet balloons or the secret barges and other such things. This is one big change for one of tech's biggest companies, and it's likely to be just the tip of the iceberg. And we'll continue to look for more information about Alphabet and its subsidiary companies. But as of now, Alphabet has filed Form 8K with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, and the form gives us a little bit more insight. Officially, Sergey Brin is now the president of Alphabet. Eric Schmidt is the CEO of Google. Pardon, he's the CEO of Google, who became its executive chairman and advisor when Page stepped back on the CEO role, and he's now executive chairman of Alphabet. Ruth Porat will become senior vice president and CFO of Alphabet, while simultaneously staying on as the CFO of Google. David Drummond will be senior vice president of corporate development and chief legal officer and secretary of Alphabet. Products that will remain under Google include Search, Ads, Maps, Apps, YouTube, Google, Android, other related infrastructure defined as the Google business. Chrome, while not on that list, will remain under Google. Calico, Nest, Fiber, Google Ventures, Google Capital, and Google X will all become Alphabet subsidiary companies, though a Google spokesperson told Ars Technica that we wouldn't have a full list until the company filed its fourth quarter financial results. So yet still, there's been a major change for Google. It's no longer owned by Google. It's now owned by Alphabet, a parent company, and the subsidiary is Google. So it's weird to see the Wikipedia page for Google change to display the parent company as something other than Google. It's very odd. It's interesting to see YouTube change with the parent company being listed as Alphabet as well. It's just all very strange. It's just a weird development overall. I'm interested to see what the future holds for Google, though. I hope it's a positive move. Anyway, it seems like it's very smart, and I really doubt that the folks over at Google don't know what they're doing. I think that they're extremely smart people over there. Some of the smartest people in the world possibly work for Google and work with Google in some capacity. So I have no doubts really that things are going to go well for Google, at least short term. So hopefully more interesting developments will come out of this, and we'll get, of course, the best out of it because we get the new technology. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with Google. It's interesting too because Google has changed a lot in not very much time. Think about it this way. Apple Computer Company came around in the mid-1970s, and the Apple II was released in around 1978. And then the Apple III came out a little bit later. But the Apple II changed a lot in the computer field. I mean, the Apple II was like the computer for education. Of course, there was a Tandy as well. There were other machines. IBM eventually got onto the consumer market. But before the Apple II, really, the consumer market for computers wasn't that great. You had Tandy, and Tandy was great. It was an IBM PC compatible. You had, well, that was it, actually. You had the IBM PC Junior, I guess, which would count. But really, the home computer market wasn't that great until Apple came around to stimulate things and paradigm shift the computer market. And, I'm no fan of Apple, but hey, lots of good things came out of Apple Computer Company back in the 1970s and the early 80s. And then the IBM PC market came along and started to become cool. You had the Commodore Amiga. Before that, you had the Commodore PET, the Commodore 64. All sorts of really cool stuff came out of Commodore back in the 80s and 90s. So the computer market had already matured by the time Google came around, really. Like consumer computers, by the time Google came around in 1998, were pretty much as they are now. The consumer computer market, in terms of home computers, hasn't really changed that terribly much since 1998. And that's okay, because now we have a standard that we're all used to. We all use QWERTY keyboards. We all use 2-button mice or 3-button mice, unless you use a Mac for some reason. We all have laptop form factors that we're used to. Our smartphones are all candy bar size. Everything has pretty much stayed the same. Now, the candy bar smartphone thing came around in 2007, and again, Apple kind of pioneered that as well. But still, things in terms of the computer market, the home consumer computer market in 1998 were pretty well solidified in terms of standards. And Google didn't really change anything hardware-wise until much later anyway, just recently. So Google, as an existence, was really sort of came late to the game even, you might say. But that's okay, because that was the perfect time. When Google came around in 1998, it changed everything about how we would search. Because before then, there's no index of websites. I mean, yeah, there were some, and there were projects for them, but there was nothing so sophisticated as Google. Whoever would expect that a search engine would turn into what we have now? Now, Google's played it very smart for forever, since its inception. Google's main source of income, of course, is off of its ad business. Google is an ad company. That's where most of its money comes from. So it's no surprise then that it's very market savvy as an ad selling company. This means that Apple, or rather Google, has oodles and gobs of money to throw around, and it can spend money on very interesting projects and take big risks that no other company really would. And it's still a company which is outside of the box in a lot of ways, in a lot of good ways too. So it's very, very cool to see what Google is going to be coming out with in the future. Think of what we have now thanks to Google. We have Android, of course. The smartphone market is stimulated. BlackBerry is not really very popular anymore, but Android has come into vogue as the new alternative to iPhones. And Android 5.0 is being very well received. The Google search engine, of course, is what almost everyone uses. Google Chrome is like the #2 browser. And of course, for some reason, Internet Explorer is #1. Don't know why. And Google Chrome is very widely used. And it's very, very popular. It's very stable. Everyone's very happy with Google Chrome. I don't use it because I like Firefox better, but I'm not knocking Chrome. I think it's a good browser. There's a Chromebook, which has become a not popular, but a viable alternative to the usual netbook that we're used to. Of course, you have all the different Google ventures. You have Google Glass, which was interesting. You have Google's forays into VR. And you have, of course, YouTube, which wouldn't become as big as it is today without the help of Google. And now, thanks to that, we have a completely changed form of entertainment. We have viral videos, which really weren't a thing until YouTube came around, at least not in a broader sense. Before then, of course, you have Flash animations and, the Badger thing way back in the day. But YouTube changed kind of everything, and Google's investment into YouTube, for some reason, Google had faith in YouTube, and for good reason. It worked. So now a lot has changed in the 21st century thanks to Google. Google really is the 21st century company in a lot of ways. So it's very, very interesting to see how the future may treat Google, and hopefully Google stays smart. And maybe Alphabet, this move with Alphabet is a good thing. So to summarize, Google is now not owned by Google. Google is owned by a company called Alphabet, which is incepted by members of Google's staff, namely the CEO, the chief chairman, and a few other people from Google migrated over to this company called Alphabet, which they created, which now owns Google. So different subsidiaries are going to be shifted into very directed courses. So you have Google, which is going to continue with its browser, with YouTube, with the Google search engine. There's probably going to be a separate ad department of Alphabet, and then you have the Google X projects, and you have different projects that Alphabet is now free to invest in that Google otherwise would have been a little bit too big to invest in. We'll put it that way, because you don't want a company that's too big, because then you start having problems, and you definitely don't want that. Then you start having problems with like Enron, where it just gets so big that it gets so unwieldy that it collapses, and you don't want that. One of J.R.R. Tolkien's unfinished stories is going to be finally published this year. Tolkien fans are rejoicing now, according to The Verge. The Lord of the Rings author's estate will now release a 100-year-old manuscript that was never before released to the public. It's titled The Story of Kullervo, Kullervo, Kullervo. That's Kullervo. I believe it's spelled or pronounced Kullervo. And the work is one of Tolkien's earliest efforts, and helped lay the foundation for stories that he would tell about Middle-earth during his career, or throughout his career. Tolkien started Kullervo in 1914 during his college days at Oxford University. The tale, which follows the tragic story of an orphan cursed with supernatural powers, is based on the Finnish epic called the Kalava, or Kalevala. And though he never finished it during his lifetime, he did use the work as a basis for his own stories and languages. So though this is the first time Kullervo is going to be made public, the manuscript was originally published in 2010 by author and Tolkien scholar Verlin Flieger in Tolkien's Studies Volume 7, The Story of Kullervo, complete with notes and supplementary essays. It's going to hit bookstores in the UK on August the 27th. It's going to be made available in America on October the 27th, although you betcha there's going to be a leaked ebook way before then. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I'm not even a huge Tolkien fan, I will admit, and I'm kind of excited to see what this story may be like. So who knows? I don't know. I'm sort of on the fence, because on the one hand, Tolkien stories are very iconic. There's a very definite style when something by Tolkien. His style is very easily identifiable. And it's going to be interesting to see how he wrote back when he was in college, possibly before his style was really refined as it was, especially by the end of Return of the King. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. We are everywhere. Listen live to Hot News Talk Radio at hotnewstalkradio.com. Download the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone and search for Hot News Talk Radio. Hot News Talk Radio is also on Twitter, where you report the world decides. That's AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. From 9 to 11 here on weekdays on Hot News Talk Radio, we have the David Tulis Show. He talks about local economy and free markets. He has a lot of really great interviews that he has. And from 11 to 12, we have the Mr. Judd Show, where he talks about local goings-on here in the Chattanooga area. And from 12 to 1, you have what you're listening to now, which is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. And for some reason, J.R.R. Tolkien, because he's coming out with a new book posthumously, written in 1914. Go figure. Up next, of course, is Laura Ingraham, and then Sean Hannity, and then Hot News Live at 5. And then you've got Cowboy with Tex from 6 to 7 here on Hot News Talk Radio. He talks about the day's events with his own very country western style here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. So India has a very interesting smartphone market that's not very well replicated here in the States, and maybe it should be. So India has a very strong focus on cheap or budget smartphones. Budget is it's the better word to use because it's not so disparaging. After a slow start to 2015, according to TechCrunch, the smartphone shipments to India recovered in the second quarter, boosted by models that cost 100 or less. According to IDC, 26.5 million devices were shipped to India during that time period, up 44% from 18.4 million units a year ago. Samsung, Micromax, and Intex took a combined 51% of the share of the India market. And smartphone shipments to India declined for the first time ever at the end of 2014 and continued to be lackluster through the first quarter of 2015. Smartphones, however, were not the only segment that's under pressure. IDC noted that the overall market for smartphones in India fell by 6% year over year in the second quarter. Total shipments of mobile phones to India started to decrease at the end of last year due to a combination of seasonality and low demands from retailers who still have surplus inventory. So just 59.4 million handsets were shipped to India last quarter, down 63.2 million handsets 12 years ago. This means that slowing shipments of feature phones may not necessarily boost shipments of smartphones. But something interesting is happening in India. The Chinese smartphone market is really picking up over in India. And you might think, well, we don't really have a very strong Chinese smartphone market here in the United States. You would be wrong. I am in my hands holding a Lenovo smartphone, which is a Lenovo. Sorry, this is a hard day for me. I've got allergies. Lenovo A850. It's a great phone. I like it a lot. It's just a little bit outdated, and it's kind of sluggish, and I need a new phone. And I dropped it and the screen cracked. So I need a new smartphone. What do? Well, I go online, I look at the different smartphone options, and I see that the Motorola Moto G looks quite nice, and it's only $179. Actually more like $200 because tax, and I got an upgrade and yada yada, but still kind of cool. So I dropped the dough on it, and it should be here tomorrow, actually. I bought it on Saturday, and it was yesterday in Hong Kong, and now somehow it's going to be at my door tomorrow by 10:30 a.m., according to FedEx. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but I'm glad it is. So I have a smartphone on the way. Well, I was wondering, Motorola used to be owned by Google. I mean, again, one of those things Google owns. Motorola used to be owned by Google not that long ago, actually, maybe 2-3 years ago. Now, it seems that Motorola is owned by, you guessed it, Lenovo, which is, of course, a Chinese company. Lenovo is gaining a lot of traction, and it's kind of surprising, actually. Do you remember the IBM Think Centers or the IBM ThinkPads? Well, guess who manufactures those now? Yeah, Lenovo. You see, IBM sold the personal computer business to Lenovo in the late 2000s, around 08, 07 or 08, sometime in there. So any ThinkCenter or ThinkPad that you buy is going to actually be manufactured by Lenovo. And they were licensed to use the IBM logo for about a year after the purchase, I think. So it's interesting to see that the Chinese market is actually really gaining traction here in the United States in a way that's kind of unprecedented, actually. We're seeing a lot of products that are made in China that aren't really advertised that they're made in China because a lot of people have sort of a stigma, I guess, against China. A lot of people are kind of prejudiced against Chinese-made products or Chinese-designed products. I don't really. I mean, I would much rather buy American, obviously, but Americans don't really make smartphones that much, at least smartphones that I can afford that much. So the Motorola Moto G seemed like the better option to me, and it had a lot of cool features that I wanted. So go figure. But if you can find me a good American-made handset that is inexpensive, I will definitely take a look at it, and good American-made computer components and all that sort of thing. I'll definitely consider purchasing them because I do need to upgrade my computer quite soon. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter, here on Hot News Talk Radio on Twitter, where you report the world decides. Check out all of our tweets, where we're constantly tweeting and retweeting and favoriting and seeing other people's tweets right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, and hotnewstalkradio.com, and on the TuneIn app as well. That's Hot News Talk Radio.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing about
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, this is your computer speaking. I don't feel so well. It's like I've come down with a bug, and I'm getting slower.
Affordable Computers. We fix sick computers. Your hometown guys at Affordable Computers will repair your PC in half the time of the big boys at an affordable price. No tricks, no gimmicks, no computer speak technobabble. Just good, quick, and courteous affordable service and repairs. Want to affordably supercharge your PC? Affordable Computers on Highway 58. Affordable Computers hand builds all desktops in-house. If you're looking for a better-than-new refurb laptop, $150 will get you a Dell or another name brand at Affordable Computers. Affordable Computers, Highway 58, between Arby's and Taco Bell. Also Fort O, Battlefield Parkway, near Holcomb's. Affordable Computers, we service what we sell. Call 499-1975. That's 499-1975.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm feeling great. Supercharged.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection: loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Do you feel better outside your home or business than in? Indoor air quality is important. Mildew, mold, smoke, water, and rodent damage are prime causes of poor indoor air quality. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals, better known as Duct Busters, cleans HVAC systems using 127 definable Duct Busters steps. Let Mark Thompson address the indoor air quality at your business to help reduce employee illnesses. Prevent fires by cleaning your dryer vents. Mark and his parents, Dick and Joan Thompson, have been building our local economy and helping local people with HVAC systems 16 years. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals. Call 876-9907. 876-9907. Ducks. Call now.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio. I'm William Wu. Authorities are considering a curfew for Ferguson, Missouri after continuing clashes last night.
Some protesters turned violent. They started throwing rocks. They started throwing frozen water bottles, even picking up chunks of asphalt from the streets and throwing those at officers. Authorities were quick to respond. They broke up the crowd. 23 people wound up behind bars.
Fox's Will Carr, a Mississippi couple, has been charged with conspiracy and attempt to provide material support to the Islamic State. This comes comes a day after a New Jersey man was charged with attempting to support ISIS.
Federal investigators say 20-year-old Nader Sadeh was part of a group of people who they'd been investigating for a while. A U.S. attorney says Sadeh allegedly sent electronic messages to a Queens, New York conspirator, voicing his hatred of the United States and his desire to what he called form a small army that would include his friends.
Fox's Laura Ingle, Fox News. We report, you decide.
You ever get that thing where you're talking and you can hear in your ear like is plugging and unplugging sort of? It's like a piston, like a gasket, and you can hear your voice in your ear. And that's been happening to me all week now. And I landed on my tailbone yesterday too, so I'm hobbling around the office, and it's really terrible. It's very pathetic, and it should not be happening. Well, this is Digital Drive. I know it's a dreary day today. It's kind of a depressing day actually for me. This is Digital Drive, and I'm your host Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. Of course, you can get us on the TuneIn Radio app and search for us there, Hot News Talk Radio. You can get that for your BlackBerry even. But if you have a smartphone such as a Android phone or an iPhone, then you can listen to us on there as well with ease. If you go to the TuneIn Radio app and search for Hot News Talk Radio, that's a great way to listen to us. Well, apparently, I promised my boss that I would do a inflammatory story today. So I have to now. I don't want to, but I have to. No, I'm kidding. Actually, it was my idea. Apparently, now this is according to RT, but I checked around and it's been other places as well. But take some of this with a grain of salt because it's still coming in, right? This is information which is still, you might call it breaking news. I don't think it's important enough to be breaking news. It's just sort of something that's happening. As you might know, the Ferguson, Missouri area has been kind of blowing up, both literally and figuratively, with recent news of. Actually, there's been no recent news really about anything in Ferguson other than it's the 1-year anniversary of the Michael Brown incident. So people have been taking to the streets yet again, and it's almost like it's 1 year ago all over again. And it's hard to believe that was 1 year ago that the whole thing happened. I mean, like, that's just astounding to me that it's actually been 1 year since the whole Michael Brown incident happened, because I remember reporting on it here on Hot News Talk Radio, and it's just very bizarre to me that it's been a year since that all happened. Well, armed to the teeth with semi-automatic assault rifles and handguns. Of course, it's not an assault rifle if it's semi-automatic. If an assault rifle is an assault rifle, then it must be select fire. Thus, it's only a semi-automatic rifle. Probably not a sporting rifle, but it's a semi-automatic rifle nonetheless. It just looks black and scary. The Oath Keepers militia, formed of former and current law enforcement and military officers, have blended into the crowd of Ferguson protesters saying, "We are on your side." Well, at least 4 members of the Oath Keepers arrived in Ferguson on early Tuesday and began patrolling the West Florissant Avenue, walking through the crowd of protesters gathered there for a day of civil disobedience following the anniversary of the killing of 18-year-old African-American Michael Brown, who was shot dead by, of course, police officer Darren Wilson. Oath Keepers are wearing military harnesses, bullet-resistant vests, although I don't know if they're actually bullet-resistant vests or if they're simply carriers. There is a very clear distinction to be made there. A carrier vest is simply for carrying items, and a bullet-resistant vest is, well, a bullet-resistant vest. Now, it's certainly not illegal to own a bullet-resistant vest. I would wear one every day if I could, but, you know, it kind of gets hot and sweaty in there. Videos and pictures posted online show that the Oath Keepers spotted at the rally are all white, although I do not believe that has any bearing on it, really, because this is an inter-race issue. They are also apparently armed with AR-15s. Those are, of course, rifles that are semi-automatic. They can have a capacity of up to 100 rounds if you buy a drum magazine for them, but generally it's 30. The general capacity of an AR-15 is a 30-round magazine, although, again, that doesn't really matter. Allegedly, they have an agreement with the police to not walk through the ranks of law enforcement, according to a Guardian reporter. They're also cited to be on the protesters' side. Whether or not that's true, we don't know. In fact, we don't really know if these are Oath Keepers or not. That's something that has to be kept in mind as well, is to be completely objective, we don't actually know if these people are Oath Keepers or not. The Oath Keepers are, of course, an organization that's kind of known for being very, I guess, pro-Constitution would be the word. Very pro-Constitution. They're very much about open carry. You can find more information about the Oath Keepers if you look it up online. It's kind of a complicated issue, but the appearance of heavily armed white men, they say white men, I don't really think that, again, has any bearing on it. Heavily armed men stirred unease on the part of the civil rights activists from the Black Lives Matter movement, heavily represented at Ferguson protests, saying, "Why are there men with guns and the police are doing nothing?" This is prominent activist Kayla Reed. That's what she demanded on Twitter. But again, you can have guns, and that's not a problem. The American nonprofit organization Oath Keepers consists mainly of former and serving U.S. military and law enforcement personnel, as well as members of other paramilitary services who declare their aim as protecting the U.S. Constitution, even at the cost of disobedience to official orders, in case these orders violate fundamental American law, which is, of course, the Constitution. Expressing his disapproval at the government's handling of the situation in Ferguson, Oath Keepers volunteer Sam Andrews told RT why the National Guard was not here supporting the St. Louis County Police and supporting the Highway Patrol and protecting these businesses, to me, is either such a grotesque incompetence or downright criminal negligence. Saying, "We are family people, and you know what? Nothing is going to change unless we stop electing politician lawyers into office." And that's what Andrews says, as quoted by Rupley. So he says, you elect Donald Trump and you put Donald Trump in office, he'll change it all. He'll get rid of these clowns, and he'll get rid of these people that violate our rights, and we'll have somebody that actually cares about Americans again, Andrews said, expressing his support for the Republican presidential candidate, and I would say expressing a lack of knowledge about how the American political system works, but that's just me. A year ago, during the first round of protests, they also patrolled Ferguson. The Oath Keepers were also present in November of 2014 when more protests erupted in the St. Louis, Missouri neighborhood. So apparently there are people walking around the streets with AR-15s and handguns and such, and they're patrolling the streets, which is very odd. And I'm not really sure what their motive is here. And again, they can be there, and I don't have any problem with them being there. I don't have any problem with anyone being anywhere in Ferguson. I think the protesters can, of course, legally protest so long as it's peaceable. The police can have a police presence there so long as it's peaceable. And the Oath Keepers can walk around if they so choose so long as it's peaceable. There's no aggression there. I don't really care. But it seems kind of odd. I wonder what the motivation is, really. Is it really that they are on the side of the protesters, or is there something else going on here? This is something that's not really been reported anywhere that I've been able to find, especially on TV news. So I figured it was worth getting out there, but I couldn't really find any sort of reason to report on it for the 5 o'clock news. So I figured I'd throw it in here just to make sure people are aware of what's going on there. Apparently there are Oath Keepers in Ferguson. It's very odd. Because it's something that's, I mean, again, I don't have a problem with them being there, but it seems kind of strange because usually you see them at, say, different rallies about the Second Amendment or First Amendment or some sort of political protest of some sort. I just wouldn't expect them to be at a Black Lives Matter rally, I suppose. But again, of course, they can be there, and that's fine. I just thought it was kind of interesting. Paul Allen has recovered a bell from the HMS Hood. So one of the great tragedies of the Second World War, according to Gizmag, has been remembered with Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist Paul G. Allen recovering the bell from the British battlecruiser, the HMS Hood, which was sunk in battle 74 years ago by Hitler's flagship Bismarck. The brass ship's bell was recovered from 1.5 miles down the Denmark Straits by a remote-operated submersible, or ROV, controlled from Allen's private yacht, the MY Octopus. So the recovery operation, which successfully concluded on August the 7th, marks 13 years since the Bell of the Hood was discovered. The salvage effort was spearheaded by the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation using a ROV built by Blue Water Recoveries, which made the initial discovery. Allen led a previous attempt to retrieve the bell in 2009, which was abandoned due to poor weather. As a warship, the Hood remains the property of the Crown and is officially designated a war grave. Salvage is therefore prohibited, and Allen was given extraordinary permission by the British government to recover the bell. So he's doing this as an act of, I guess, philanthropy, and as an act of, just attempting to preserve history, because certainly this is a extremely important thing that needs to be recovered. The bell of the HMS Hood is a historical artifact. It's really just something that needs to be in a museum, and it's a shame that it's at the bottom of the ocean, and time tends to cloud memories, and certainly the HMS Hood does need to be remembered throughout the generation. So it's a good thing that this has been recovered. HMS Hood was commissioned back in 1920, and as a flagship of the British battlecruiser Squadron, it was one of the most advanced and generally regarded as the most beautiful of the Royal Navy's interwar capital ships. and she was sunk on May the 24th, 1941, while engaging the pocket battleship Bismarck, which was attempting to break out into the Atlantic Ocean to prey on Allied shipping. Ultimately, the Bismarck was cornered and sunk, but not before landing a shell on the under-armored deck of the hood. The shell pierced the deck and detonated the cruiser's magazine, which is, of course, where the ammunition is stored for the guns, which resulted in the explosion, which killed 1,415. That's 1,415 officers and men, with only 3 survivors. The hood was the largest Royal Navy ship ever sunk and the greatest single loss of life. The inscribed bell is made of brass and is 18 inches high. It was cast from the previous HMS Hood, which was the Victorian battleship that served until 1914. The recovery effort was aided by the fact that when the latter ship broke apart in 1941, the bell landed well away from the main wreckage. According to the Royal Navy, the bell will undergo a year of restoration and will then go on display at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth. And they also have a video of the recovery, which you can find on YouTube under the title HMS Hood Bell Recovered. Again, that's Paul Allen and one of his robots that's helping to recover this very important historical item. The World War II is a very odd time, of course, for world history, and we got a lot of atrocities out of it. We got a lot of heroism out of it, and we got a lot now of historical artifacts out of it. I was just the other day watching a documentary about sort of, I don't know what you would call them, I guess corpse recovery teams, you might say, who are working to recover the bodies of different soldiers who died on battlefields in Europe and give them a proper burial. Technically, it's illegal, of course, but they are doing it for honorable purposes. They're digging up both Germans and Russians and Americans alike, inspecting the gear, making sure it's cleaned up, and then burying it all in a respectful way. So it's really interesting to see how this generation is handling the after effects, which we're still seeing, of World War II, because there's a lot of hurt still after that war. It's not completely over in a lot of social senses, because the aftermath is still very much with us. A lot of the things that are going on today are a direct result of the end of World War II, and especially in Europe, we're seeing a lot of tensions that are going up again in a very old way that harkens back to those days. So it's interesting to see how really it's almost like it hasn't ended sometimes, or we still see a lot of the after effects, even though a lot of the people who fought in the war and especially commanded in the war are now deceased. We're still seeing some effects of it still in the 21st century, 70 some odd years later, coming up on 80 years later. We're still seeing effects of it even today. It's very strange. Apparently China has been reading White House officials' private emails. So there's yet more bad news for the federal employees, according to The Verge. This time it's concerning privately held email accounts. According to a new report from NBC News, China has been actively targeting the personal email accounts of White House officials since April 2010, with the program continuing through at least 2014. It's unclear so far how many officials were successfully targeted and how senior those officials were, but according to senior intelligence officer, many top officials were successfully compromised. What that number is, we don't know, and who they are, we don't know, but he's saying many, so we just assume it's many. Unlike similar efforts against the State Department or the Office of Personnel Management, this attack hasn't targeted official IT infrastructure, but it's focused on personally maintained accounts on Gmail or other services. Google actually spoke openly about the attack back in 2011, but officials now say that the attack spanned a number of different private providers and continued for years after the initial announcement, likely through to the present day. So the attacks are particularly crucial in light of recent news that Hillary Clinton conducted State Department business through a private email account. Still, given the earlier compromise of the State Department's unclassified email system, it's not clear the private account exposed Clinton to any additional risk, seeing as it seems to be quite easy to get into email accounts, even if they are from a official source. So it really doesn't seem to make much of any difference at all. So it's interesting too how we usually think of U.S. infrastructure as being the best and the strongest, and maybe it is, but it's also still very, very vulnerable because there's no such thing as complete security. Maybe the U.S. has the best security in the world, but it's still not complete because it can't be. Maybe the U.S. has the best army in the world, and probably it does, but it's not completely without vulnerability because there is no such thing as invulnerable. There simply is not. There has to be a vulnerability somewhere at some point. There's no such thing as invulnerable, of course, unless we're talking about the divine, but generally we're not. So there's no such thing as invulnerable, especially when we're talking about computer systems. So it's no surprise really that the email accounts got hacked into. I'm reading a book right now that's called The Art of Deception. It's from 2002. It's written by Kevin Mitnick, who of course is a very influential and important hacker and very important in computer history. And I would encourage you to read as much as you can about him, especially his books, which are very good. I actually have a copy of it sitting on my desk. Ghost in the Wires is a really good book. It's his autobiography. Definitely check that out if you can. But The Art of Deception really shows off the art of social engineering. It's extremely interesting to see how social engineering can sometimes just be the simplest thing and sometimes the most difficult thing, but it just completely negates the technical factor of getting into a computer system, because if you can just have someone else do it for you, then you've pretty much got it cinched. So really, when we're talking about a lot of these email hacks, these email compromises, I would think it would be fair to say that some of the top generals in the Pentagon are perhaps not so tech savvy, just due to their old age and not really having to focus on computer systems because they've always had other people do it for them. But these people, I assume, would be at least a good target for a phishing attack or social engineering, where you say, hey, I'm with IT, I need you to give me your password for such and such because we're having a computer problem down here. And he goes, oh yeah, sure, my password is such and such. Thank you, sir, have a nice day. And then now you've got it and you got into the email system. So no computer system is complete so long as there's human error, and there's always going to be human error. So anytime we talk about a computer system, especially and even government, it's always going to be insecure in some way because there's always going to be human error. It's easy to fall victim to human error because everyone has it, and that's just how it is. No matter your experience, everyone can be affected by a social engineering attack such as that. So no computer system is entirely secure. It just simply cannot be. Although, of course, taking additional risk by using a private email server is certainly not acceptable. Although I can understand the reasoning, because I wouldn't trust a government email server either. Still, though, kind of illegal. But anyway, Facebook, Google, and Twitter, unlikely allies, are banding together to battle child pornography, which is a common foe for these different services. The battle against child pornography is now being fought with new technology and the support of some of Silicon Valley's biggest companies. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Twitter are now all working with the UK's Internet Watch Foundation, or IWF, to implement a new system that will help to detect and block images of child pornography online. IWF is a charitable foundation, and it has introduced a new technology that enables it to tag images of sexual abuse with distinct hashes, essentially codes that act like a digital fingerprint. Think of it like hashtags on Twitter, except a little bit different and more meant for machines to read. The hash is generated by an algorithm. Once assigned to an image, it's unique to it. Oh, that sort of hash. Okay, so we're talking about an MD5 hash. So this type of hash is a unique string of numbers and letters that is different every time, and it's used to uniquely identify a file. You can use it to do what's called a checksum. In this case, it's used to uniquely identify a questionable image. So I thought, for some reason, they were talking about tagging code as in like computer code, where you can use a £, to insert a comment that's not going to be read or compiled. But anyway, it acts like a digital fingerprint, essentially. The hash is generated by an algorithm, and once it's assigned to an image, it is unique to it, making it easy to identify a specific image against a list of offending hashes. The IWF then keeps a record of all the hashes, which it has only shared with 5 tech companies so far, but plans to roll out to other IWF members soon. Once the system is implemented, any image that's uploaded to Facebook, Twitter, or any other participating website is then scanned. If the image has previously been tagged by the IWF, then the system will detect its hash and automatically prevent it from being uploaded, thus from also being shared. So the IWF estimates that it can currently remove 500 web pages that contain child pornography per day, and that count will only increase as more images are identified and the hash list grows. But the technology does not, as of yet, extend to the part of the internet where child pornography thrives, which is the deep web. although there are efforts to work on that as well. There's, of course, great potential here as the hash list grows. It could conceivably hash millions of images and help to block them. Google has long scanned the images that pass through Gmail for child pornography and has previously committed to working with the IWF, but there's no quick fix for a problem of this scale, and the joint support of the tech giants could help to widen the net. So it's good to see some goodwill being expressed by some of these large corporations. Google and Twitter and Facebook have all been very vocal in their stances, I guess, against child pornography. So it's good to see some action being taken to remove that from the internet. So it's good to see. And it's good to see that there's being a concerted effort to get that off of there. It's interesting, though, you'll note that there's not government involvement there. And again, I don't want to exploit this to make a political point, but just make note of that. There doesn't appear to be much government involvement there. So it seems that when private interests are involved to complete a goal, they tend to get done much more efficiently than if a government was working on it. And that's just the nature of a government anyway. Governments have to have so much accountability, although they don't really. And governments have to have so much paperwork and checking, and someone's over this person, and there's no individual projects or anything like that. So it leads to a situation where really nothing gets done in any sort of fast manner. The only way something gets done is if you have a despot of sorts who takes exclusive control over something and then gets everything done himself, and then that would be illegal. So go figure. But that's why government is one of the many reasons why government is extremely inefficient, is because there's so much paperwork and there's so much process to get one simple thing done. There's a form for everything, and there's certainly no statutes for committees. So there's not really a whole lot of motivation either in government to get anything done, because you'll get paid either way. So it's a lot of the time doesn't really matter. There's no motivation for achievement in government, which is another reason why there's quite a bit of failing. It's a sad day now for the musical childhood of many generations. According to Ars Technica, the Associated Press is now reporting that the parent company of Columbia House, the organization that made the famous music and DVD clubs of yore, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. This move comes nearly 20 years after 20 years of declining sales. According to the AP, Filmed Entertainment, which is Columbia House's parent company, told the wire service that the revenue hit a high of $1.4 billion in 1996, and in 2014 that figure fell to $17 million, or roughly 1% of its peak. While Chapter 11 protection doesn't necessarily mean Filmed Entertainment intends to go out of business, things are certainly not looking good. Companies like Radio Shack and Kodak have done this in recent years to obtain a certain period of time within which to rebuild itself and shield itself from creditors. Kodak at least has emerged from its situation. Radio Shack not yet. Maybe Columbia House will. The service started back in 1955 with vinyl records, and Columbia House introduced pop culture fans to many, many film and music entities over the years through its service. It operated on offers like 8 CDs for 1 cent plus shipping, or an 8-track tape of the month club, relying on return or pay to keep philosophy. But physical media at large has gradually fallen out of favor over the years, and services like Napster and Netflix and iTunes are all overlapping what Columbia House intended to do. So Columbia House was truly an inspiration for those services, a pioneer of that model, but it is no more. And that's just the nature of the market. There are going to be things which are obsolete at some point. Things which were giants at one point will become obsolete later on. Think of it this way. Google is making great strides. Google seems to be a really cool company. Google's making tons and tons of money, and it seems like that money's never going to go away. But 100 years from now, will Google still be around? It's a good question. We don't know at this point. It's tough to tell. Maybe at some point, even Google will become obsolete, and the market will determine that. But so far, things are looking quite good for Google. It's certainly not too big to fail. Anything can happen. But as of right now, it seems that things are looking very, very well for Google. So it's good to see that. And again, Alphabet is now the new company that's been formed to take control of Google, so to speak. Google is now owned by a subsidiary which is called Alphabet. And again, nothing's really going to change on our end for Google. It's not been purchased. It's just there's a new company that is owning Google, and it's owned by the same people who are in Google Incorporated in the first place. So Google Incorporated is no longer the owning parent company. Now it's Alphabet, which is brand new, just been founded, and I'm very excited to see the future of Google. And no, I don't own stock in Google, and I'm not trying to make more money by saying that. This is Digital Drive right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode.